report. He now says that he's not sure that it's true, telling CNN, quote, "I should have done a much better job of speaking with more suspicion than certainty, and I regret my mistake." Two of the report's authors, two of their three authors on the July story, Carl Bernstein and Jim Sciutto, published another piece. The title, "Attorney for Michael Cohen Keeps Changing His Story on Trump Tower Meeting." They note that in their original report, it said Cohen told Congress something different about the meeting, and that Davis changed his story after his client pled guilty to charges related to campaign violations and other financial crimes. So at this point, Sandra, CNN is not backing away from this report, and clearly President Trump is not backing away from his attacks on the organization and this report.
Sandra? And Allison, there are questions about a White House statement yesterday and the president possibly undercutting his defense secretary. What happened there?
Right, so the president tweeted a statement from the White House about joint military exercises with South Korea, the ones that he called war games and suspended after the summit with Kim Jong-un in Singapore. He said in his tweet, the statement said in part, quote, "There is no reason at this time to be spending large amounts of money on joint U.S.-South Korea war games. Besides, the president can instantly start the joint exercises again with South Korea and Japan if he chooses." The statement came a day after his defense secretary seemed to suggest that those drills might actually resume.
We suspended several of the largest exercises, but we did not suspend the rest. So there are ongoing exercises all the time on the peninsula. The reason you've not heard much about them is North Korea could not in any way misinterpret those as somehow breaking faith with the negotiation. So the exercises continue.
Before the president's tweet, but after that statement or that public, that speaking of Mattis, the Pentagon put out a statement saying that no decisions have been made about suspending any future exercises. So still a little confusion there, Sandra, but the final word tends to be deferred to the White House.
Allison Barber at the White House for us this morning. Thank you.
For more on the president's Twitter storm on the media, let's bring in Chris Stirewalt, Fox News politics editor. And this thing between CNN and the president, Chris, is getting very hot.
Hot is not the word that comes to mind for me when I think about that channel and the president. Stale, I think, is a word that comes to mind. We keep going around and around and around. This is the self-licking ice cream cone. The president attacks CNN, CNN attacks the president. They go back and forth, they go back and forth, they go back and forth. As far as I can tell, it doesn't get anybody else anywhere.
But the fact that CNN continues to stand by the story that Lanny Davis was a source for, and Lanny Davis has backed away from his own claims, is a little unusual, isn't it?
I mean, it's unusual. Look, I have no idea what CNN says. They stand by the story, that they got the goods on it. So what can we do but take them at their word? But again, with all of the Mueller stuff, with all of this stuff, the breathless speculation that we have seen from both sides, from people who are trying to discredit the Mueller investigation and also from people who are trying to discredit the president, all of the speculative stories, take them with a grain of salt. Skip them if you want. Go read the funny pages if you'd prefer, because the truth is we're not going to know the real deal until Mueller's done with his report. That's where the goods are. Everything else is, come on.
And when is that going to be?
Well, that will depend on when the president is ready to talk to Robert Mueller. And what we have watched is a very long, very complicated dance, this kabuki theater between the president and his lawyers and Mueller and his team as they rack up indictments, as they rack up convictions, as they keep moving forward, and the president working hard to discredit him and discredit the Justice Department as he goes. And they're playing a very, very high-stakes game of chicken right now that probably ends up at the Supreme Court.
The convictions, though, don't really have anything to do with Robert Mueller's original mandate, do they?
Well, as the president likes to point out, what does he call them? Squealers, snitchers, flippers. His concern about the flippers and people who are busted for something else, convicted for something else, and then remember suddenly, yes, there were things that I hadn't mentioned to you before that maybe now I would like to tell you because I would like to avoid some prison time. That becomes material, and this is something prosecutors have done since the earth cooled. This is a popular route for prosecutors to take. You find the weak link, you find the person who has criminal exposure, and you squeeze them hard to get what you want.
Alan Dershowitz is commenting on the CNN situation and, with regard to the president. I want to play that for you here.
have two suggestions for them. Number one, that they tell us the nature of the sources without telling us the names. Are they eyewitnesses? Is it a hearsay source? Or second, that they give the source to their expert on journalism and let their expert decide whether or not they should stick with the story. They have to do something to preserve their credibility.
More kabuki theater, or does he have a point, Chris?
It's not my job to tell CNN how to run its network. We have good procedures here. We have good protocols here at the Fox News Channel in our news division, and we are proud of how we vet stories and make sure that sources are done right. And we have a great team of news professionals here, and that's how we do it. I would say this, John. I think this is probably the most significant thing in all of the argle-bargle today that is flooding out about the president's media criticism. I think this bit that you guys mentioned earlier about him suddenly saying that there was something fudged about his very consequential interview with Lester Holt with NBC, where he said, yes, he fired James Comey because of the probe into Russia's interference in 2016. That may end up being the most significant thing of all of this, and the rest may be sound and fury.
Well, and you've got the president's lawyer leaving the administration. That announcement just out today from the White House.
Oh, yeah, it's going. Summer ain't done. The hot summer of 2018 sure ain't done.
Chris Stirewalt, our Fox Politics Director. Chris, thank you.
You bet.
Fox News alert, new developments on the 5 extremist Muslim suspects tied to a New Mexico compound where children were kept in squalor. 3 of them were released after a judge dropped all charges against them. 2 are still behind bars and will be charged in connection with the child's death. Jeff Paul joins us live from our Los Angeles bureau. Jeff?
Well, yeah, Sandra, 2 judges were forced to drop the charges, all due to a missed deadline. Prosecutors had 10 days to schedule a court hearing to establish they had probable cause for the arrest, but for unknown reasons right now, they never did so. Now, this all stems from a raid that happened earlier in the month. Law enforcement found a dugout trailer in a rural area surrounded by old tires. They also found 11 children on the site, as well as the body of the 3-year-old son of one of the suspects. Now, prosecutors allege the group was involved in terrorism and Muslim extremism and wanted to train one of the kids to carry out future school shootings. The latest development only adds to the growing tensions and fears within the community about what the 5 suspects were trying to achieve.
People are concerned that the law isn't followed because they've heard allegations, but the law has to be followed by the state as well. And they had to bring this case before a preliminary examination within 10 days. They didn't do so.
Now, 3 of the 5 have been released. We're still waiting on the fate of the other 2 suspects. Prosecutors immediately filed child abuse charges against the 2 who are still being held. We also are hearing reports that DA Donald Gallegos is said to be preparing to refile those original charges. Sandra?
Jeff Paul, thank you.
The chairman of New Mexico's Republican Party has been an outspoken critic of the judge in this case. Ryan Cangelosi joins us with his reaction coming up later in this hour.
Plus, Judge Kavanaugh's confirmation hearings, they begin early next week. So what goes into this process exactly? The leading communications strategist for Judge Neil Gorsuch will join us next.
Plus, emotional farewells continue for Senator John McCain. What we will see at today's memorial service as friends and family and colleagues from all walks of life pay tribute to him and say goodbye.
I consider it a great privilege to have served with John, and I will miss him as a friend and as a strong force for America in the world.
Today is the day for opening statements. The next 2 days, Wednesday and Thursday, we're going to keep it on schedule by keeping it in session all day and well into the night until every member of the committee gets a chance to ask their questions. As McConnell has said, he wants this person through the Senate by the end of September.
Senate Judiciary Chairman Chuck Grassley leaving no doubt that confirmation hearings for Judge Brett Kavanaugh will go on as planned next week, despite some Democrats pushing for a delay. Our next guest has some insight into this process. Ron Bonjean was the leading communications strategist for Judge Neil Gorsuch's during his confirmation hearing process. Great to have you on the program this morning, Ron. If you could,
thanks so much.
Give us some insight as to what goes into this process.
Right. Well, it's very labor intensive. You know, unfortunately, the confirmation process is now turned into more like a political campaign that lasts around 2 months. And you're only going to really see the nominee talk when he gives his nomination speech at the White House, and then when he gives his opening statement, you know, at the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing and answers questions. And so, literally, in between meeting with senators to talk about his views on the law, he is practicing, and hundreds of hours of mock hearings over at the old Executive Office building. Kavanaugh has been brushing up on, you know, on past case law, as well as, you know, anticipating what kind of questions might be asked of him by the committee. And, you know, he is assisted by the White House counsel's office, by former clerks, brilliant legal minds, former senators, as well as I'm sure current senators have come in. And they literally go through hours and hours of questions and answers back and forth to get him ready. They even ask him tougher questions that he will likely be asked, just to make sure he's ready to be questioned in front of the committee, as well as millions of people will be watching it across the country.
His time, obviously, in George W. Bush's White House has come under a microscope, and will be during this hearing. What do you expect will be perhaps the narrative that comes out of this?
Well, I think the narrative that people will arrive to is that he is supremely qualified, and that's something that no one is arguing. That he is a judge's judge. Many brilliant legal minds have said, and that he has presided over 300 opinions during his 12 years as a circuit court judge as well. You know, about 13 of his rulings have been upheld by the Supreme Court and have been adopted into legal policy. So I would say people will arrive at, this is a guy who can handle the job. This is someone that they can trust as a justice to think independently because of his years on the bench and all the experience and education that he has.
Well, Ron, we know that Republicans are eager to confirm him. Democrats have been trying to do what they can to stop this process. We know the hearing begins Tuesday morning of next week. Here's Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown sort of predicting what he thinks could get in the way. He is saying, I think this becomes the narrative of his nomination, which could bring it down if people, and referencing Obamacare, by the way, if people realize that their insurance is at risk because of this court nominee. I think there is going to be a lot of pressure put on a lot of people to vote no. And this is, as we have heard now, that in these private meetings with Senate Democrats, that Kavanaugh has seemed skeptical about Republicans' willingness to repeal Obamacare.
Yeah, I think this is the Democrats' one of their last Hail Mary passes before the hearing. And we'll get to hear from Kavanaugh about all this, you know, during the question and answer. But I would say that, you know, I would not want a judge to be telling senators in private meetings about how he would rule on potential hypothetical cases that might come before the court. I think it's more important to ask him about his judicial philosophy, what he thinks about the role of being a judge. But on specific issues, it's very difficult for him to be answering these type of questions. I would have to say also, you know, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse was really frustrated with Kavanaugh because he believes that he wouldn't uphold anything regarding Obamacare, especially the right for people to have insurance. So, you know, I think the Democrats are all over the place on this. They're throwing Hail Mary passes. They demanded delay. Which is really a last stand. I mean, it's likely that Kavanaugh will get confirmed if he knocks it out of the park during the hearings next week.
Well, as you said, that takes hours, hundreds of hours, as you
yes.
said, of preparation on the part of Judge Kavanaugh. All of this is set to begin next Tuesday morning. Thank you very much, Ron, for joining us.
Thanks so much.
Sparks flying last night in the state of New York as its governor, Andrew Cuomo, and his primary challenger, Cynthia Nixon, go after each other in a heated and contentious debate. We will bring you the highlights next.
Plus, President Trump hitting the campaign trail for some pivotal races as he pushes for that red wave come November. Will he turn conventional political wisdom on its head again?
And services continue today for Senator John McCain as the nation honors the life and legacy of an American hero.
Imagining Arizona without John McCain is like picturing an Arizona without the Grand Canyon. It's just not natural.
The family of a black teenager killed by a Texas police officer says his prison sentence is too lenient. Roy Oliver was sentenced to 15 years in prison. He fired into a car full of teenagers last year. 15-year-old Jordan Edwards was in the passenger seat, unarmed.
Thankful for the verdict that we received. Although we wanted more years, he actually can see life again after 15 years, and that's not enough because Jordan can't see life again.
Authorities initially said the vehicle backed up toward officers in an aggressive manner, but later admitted that was not the case.
Senator John McCain honored today at a memorial service in Phoenix, Arizona, one day after an emotional ceremony in the state capitol, where the McCain family and his friends remembered him with tears and tributes. So let's go live to Alicia Acuna in Phoenix. It was tough watching Senator McCain's family in their grief, Alicia.
Hi, John. Yes, absolutely. This is a very close family, as you know, and yesterday was just the first of what will be 5 days of services and ceremonies, and particularly touching were the moment Senator McCain's wife of 38 years approached her husband's casket. She, of course, followed by their children and their families.
Some have disagreed with some of Senator McCain's votes on policy positions, but that should not diminish our gratitude for his service. And let's return to where I began, John's love for America and Arizona.
The public was invited to pay its last respects as well, and 15,000 people waited in the sun in triple-digit temperatures to do so. Some of the McCain children greeted and shook hands with the folks who stood in line. And, John, that line started and opened up around 1:30, 2 o'clock local time. The last person walked through at 9 p.m. John?
So what do we expect today and into the weekend, Alicia?
Well, in a little over 2 hours, we'll see the McCain family return to the state capitol where the late senator is lying in state. He will then be taken to the North Phoenix Baptist Church. That is where a celebration of his life and legacy will take place. Former Vice President Joe Biden will speak, and in attendance will be more than 24 sitting and former senators. Then the motorcade will depart to Sky Harbor Airport, where his casket will be flown to Joint Base Andrews. There will be a private ceremony there. Then on Friday, the senator will lie in state at the National Capitol Rotunda. On Saturday, there will be a national memorial at Washington National Cathedral. There will be tributes and readings by family and friends, including former President George W. Bush and former President Barack Obama. Then, John, there will be a private ceremony at the cemetery at the Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland, where the senator will be interred. John?
Alicia Acuna, live from Phoenix. Thank you.
Fox News Alert Special Counsel Robert Mueller asking for more time to decide whether to retry Paul Manafort on those remaining 10 counts in Virginia.
Plus, an update on the Bruce Ohr investigation, what a Republican congressman is accusing the FBI of doing.
Plus, President Trump claiming Google is rigged. What does this mean for Republican candidates in the midterm elections? Kayleigh McEnany, RNC spokeswoman, joins us later this hour.
I can say that with respect to Google and Twitter and Facebook, there is a big difference. I think it's a very serious problem because they're really trying to silence a very large part of this country.
When they went to the court, the FBI knew 3 important things, and they didn't disclose this to the court. They knew the Ohr's involvement in production of the dossier. They knew that Christopher Steele had this extreme bias against the president, and they knew who paid for the dossier, and they didn't disclose those key facts to the court when they went there to get the warrant to spy on Carter Page and the Trump campaign.
That, of course, is Congressman Jim Jordan responding to Democrats criticizing the Bruce Ohr investigation. The DOJ official testified behind closed doors on Capitol Hill about his ties to the author of the anti-Trump dossier. Congressman Jordan says his critics need to look at the facts, alleging the FBI did not share important information with the FISA court. President Trump weighing in on Twitter with this: how the hell is Bruce Ohr still employed at the Justice Department? Disgraceful. Witch hunt. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is live in Washington with an update on this. Catherine?
Well, thank you, Sandra, and good morning. We're also learning more about Bruce Ohr's closed-door testimony. Two sources close to the investigation tell Fox News that Ohr had contact with multiple officials about the Trump dossier: former British spy Christopher Steele, Glenn Simpson of Fusion GPS, the firm behind the dossier, as well as Ohr's wife, Nellie. On the Hill earlier this week, Ohr ignored our questions.
Mr. Ohr, who authorized your contact with the FBI? Mr. Ohr, were you acting alone, or did you have authority from a Justice Department official? How did your wife benefit from the dossier contract? Did you have a conflict of interest? Mr. Ohr, will you take our questions?
The sources tell Fox News Ohr's contacts included former FBI agent Peter Strzok, former FBI lawyer Lisa Page, former Deputy Director Andrew McCabe, FBI agent Joseph Pienka, who worked closely with Strzok and handled the interview of former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, as well as Justice Department official Andrew Weissmann, who was then chief of the fraud division and is now assigned as a lead prosecutor to the Russia special counsel Robert Mueller's team. Fox News is told that Weissmann was kept in the loop specifically on the dossier, its author Steele, and the opposition research firm Fusion GPS. Republican Congressman Darrell Issa has firsthand knowledge of Ohr's testimony.
One of the things that Bruce Ohr said to us, and it took a little work to get it, was he clearly knew this was opposition research paid for by, quote, opponents to Donald Trump. You know, he said he didn't know it was the DNC at the time, nor did he need to. His wife was happily doing research and then turning it over as evidence.
Fox News contacted all of the parties that were identified to us, and they declined to comment or they did not respond. Democrats in the House are characterizing this as an attack on Ohr, and they argue that nothing he did was illegal, Sandra.
And Catherine, there are new developments on the Manafort case. What are we learning there?
Well, that's right. You recall that the jury was divided on 10 counts in that prosecution, and the judge declared a mistrial on those counts. Now, special counsel prosecutors want more time to decide whether they will retry those 10 counts. The other factor at play is the upcoming September trial. Jury selection begins in this city on the 17th. Manafort's defense team had the option of combining the indictments in Virginia and D.C. into one case, but chose not to for strategic reasons. And to complicate the case further, defense wants the second trial here in Washington moved out of the area. According to their recent filing, Manafort's legal team says that he has a right under the Sixth Amendment to a speedy and fair trial with an impartial jury, and they feel they cannot get that here in a city like Washington, which is so politicized. Sandra.
Catherine Herridge, thank you.
You're welcome.
The conventional wisdom is that this would be a challenging year for our party and even the best of our candidates. But I think we all know what President Donald Trump thinks of conventional wisdom. We made history in 2016 in Michigan, and we're going to make history again in 2018 when we elect John James to the United States Senate. You ready?
That's Vice President Mike Pence campaigning in Michigan for Senate candidate John James, telling the pundits this: underestimate President Trump at your own risk. Meanwhile, the president barnstorming for Republicans in several battleground states as we close in on the midterm. Kayleigh McEnany, spokeswoman for the RNC, joins me now. Debbie Stabenow, the Democratic senator in Michigan, has been in office since 2000. Republicans seem to think they have a chance to unseat her. The polls don't indicate that would be the case, but if you listen to the vice president and the president, they don't think much of polling.
That's right. I mean, the polls in Florida showed that Gwen Graham was going to win the Democratic primary. She obviously did not. So polling is not always accurate. If anyone can unseat Debbie Stabenow, it is John James. He is a rising rock star in our party, a veteran. Michigan is a state that President Trump won. It's not a state that Republicans have won since the 80s, but President Trump did it. So defying history is our task, as the chairwoman of our party says repeatedly, but we can do it this year, and we can do it in Michigan.
He's also a West Point graduate, a veteran of a couple of combat tours in Iraq, and a businessman. This is a guy who knows something about how to meet a payroll.
That's exactly right. He's a stellar candidate. He's the exact type of candidate we want running across the country. So he can do this. And I'm so glad to hear the vice president use the word unconventional, because I want to share with you some facts that are unconventional right now. The fact that in New Jersey, a deeply blue state, you have Bob Menendez, who is now only 6 points ahead of the Republican. The fact that in Wisconsin, the Republican nominee, Leah Vukmir, is only behind by 2 points. And the fact that in one of the bluest House districts in the country, in New York, John Katko, the Republican, is up by 15 points. That is unconventional. Those are definite trends toward the Republican Party and toward a red wave.
So you don't think there's going to be a blue wave this time around in October?
If Republicans turn out, there will not be a blue wave. We have to mobilize Republicans, and that's why President Trump, he's our secret weapon going into the midterms. We see what his endorsements do. They swing elections by 20 to 30 points. He's going to be out across the country. You named 3 states that he's going to be in coming up here on the campaign trail. So President Trump can mobilize the base and can defy history.
Yeah, he's heading to Montana, among other places. How much of a swing do you see after the president makes an appearance?
Oh, it's incredible. You look in Florida, Ron DeSantis was down by 15 points. There was a 35-point swing toward Adam Putnam. In the Georgia race, there was a 42-point swing towards the gubernatorial candidate there that won, the Republican. District in New York's 11th district, there was a 36-point swing. So this president swings elections by dozens and dozens of points. It's incredible. We've never seen anything like it. Ronald Reagan didn't have this ability. President Trump does.
But he also has his detractors. How do you know that, those who dislike President Trump and dislike his politics don't go out to the polls and vote for, say, Debbie Stabenow in this case?
Well, the left is mobilized. I mean, we know that. We see Democratic turnout up across the country. So we know the left's mobilized. But this president, you look, 90% approval among Republican voters. So, he has the ability to match high Democratic turnout with even higher Republican turnout. So there's no doubt both sides are energized, but the president can really mobilize support within our party.
The president is taking on Google, claiming that it did not highlight his first address to Congress after he first became president, or his State of the Union address earlier this year. Google denies that, says they didn't do the joint session of Congress for President Barack Obama either. Where do you come down on this?
Right. Well, Google, we are really, anytime you Google a political issue, there are anti-Trump stories. And, I was looking at a study done by a company that specializes in search engine optimization technology, and they studied 1,200 URLs and found that you're 40% more likely to get a left-leaning story on any given political issue. So there's data out there suggesting Google's biased. And my question to Google is quite simple. If you're not biased, if you're not banning conservative thought, why not testify before Congress? Because there is bipartisan outrage. Mark Warner, a Democrat, saying, why are you not sending your CEO here next week alongside Twitter and Facebook CEOs? So if you're not biased, very simple, Google, show up at Congress, explain yourself to us. Don't leave us all in an opaque situation. Don't leave us in the dark.
But they are so powerful. They are the dominant search engine. How do you combat that if, in fact, that bias exists?
Well, by doing what we're doing now and saying this publicly and warning consumers, we're noticing a trend. It's time to speak up, because when public pressure mounts, we notice that's when change is made. We saw that with Facebook apologizing for banning Diamond and Silk. We have to put public pressure on Google to be transparent, to show up at Congress alongside Facebook and Twitter, and explain yourself.
Kayleigh McEnany, spokeswoman for the Republican National Committee. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, John.
Fox News alert, a new reaction to the decision to drop charges against extremist Muslim suspects tied to a New Mexico compound where children were held in deplorable conditions. The chairman of the New Mexico Republican Party will join us next.
Plus, Iran's supreme leader issuing a warning to the world, saying his nation is ready to abandon the nuclear deal with Europe. So what would that mean? Our headliner, New York Congressman Lee Zeldin, joins us to react.
People are concerned that the law isn't followed because they've heard allegations, but the law has to be followed by the state as well. And they had to bring this case before preliminary examination within 10 days. They didn't do so.
The defense attorney for one of the extremist Muslim suspects tied to a New Mexico compound where children were kept in squalor. The judge dismissing charges against 3 of them, ruling that authorities violated the state's 10-day rule. Ryan Cangelosi is the chairman of the New Mexico Republican Party, and I know that you have been on this from the beginning and feel very passionately about the decision the judge has made here. What was your reaction?
Well, when I found out that the DA failed to schedule a preliminary hearing, something very simple, it just really infuriated me first and foremost, because we have children who are living in very inhumane conditions. We also have another situation where they were being trained to kill other children, and now the judge is having to drop these child abuse charges is just indefensible.
Why? Why did she do this?
Well, because the DA failed to schedule a preliminary hearing within the 10 days. It was a rule that the DA should have followed. This is a complete failure on the part of this Democrat DA up in Taos County, and it truly is indefensible.
Now, there are, when you bring politics into the picture, this is an elected Democrat, the judge in this case. The reforms to the detention system is what has played a big part here, and she attributes her decision to that.
Well, what we're having here is that in the past legislative session, there was a law passed with regards to allowing people out on bonds, and we saw that earlier this month or in August, where we were all up in arms because the judge allowed the 5 defendants to go out on bond, which we were very frustrated by. But now we have this other situation where the DA failed to just do a very simple procedure and scheduling a preliminary hearing, and the judges' hands are tied now, both judges, and they had to follow rule and allow or will drop these child abuse charges, which is just unbelievable to us.
Ryan,
and this is just a complete failure of the justice system.
As I mentioned, you have been speaking out very critically about this from the beginning. What do people need to know about the facts in this case and what we know about what was happening on that compound?
Well, I'm glad that you asked that question. Here we have this case where we have a child who was kidnapped, taken onto this very inhumane conditions where they were raising these children, training children how to kill other children, going into schools to kill law enforcement officers, to go shoot up government buildings. We have a child who was found dead. And it was like a third world country. They were caught. They were then brought forth by the prosecutors, and the judge then at that point in time said that they weren't a danger to society. And that's the other thing that caused a lot of frustration throughout New Mexico. And regardless of being Democrat or Republican, we're New Mexicans and we want our children to be safe, and we take child abuse very seriously in this state. And to see these 5 now be set free, well, that's not the... 2 are still being held because there was a child who was found dead.
Right, and that was
but
the 3-year-old child
being able to be released yesterday.
And that's key in this, and that child was found. He was 3 years old. Health officials did confirm, as we were reporting earlier this month, that the remains of that child were found. The judge said this was a difficult decision. The charge has been dropped. Prosecutors say that they could still seek charges, though, here, Ryan, for the 3 by asking a grand jury to indict them, but no immediate indication of how they're going to proceed. How do you expect them to?
Well, I hope that the DA does follow through and file new charges, because you have this situation where kids were living in very inhumane conditions, like a third world country here in America. And so I think that all 5 need to go through trial, and be held accountable for how these children were being treated. I think all of those, the thing that really is shocking to me is that there were 5 adults and we have a dead child. Yeah. And the 3 of them are being released or have been released. 2 are still being detained because of the situation of a dead child. But that a child was kidnapped, brought onto this camp, died, and none of the adults reported that is shocking.
A lot of people have been watching this story and are horrified by the conditions in which those children were living. And now this. We'll continue to follow all of it. Ryan Cangelosi, thank you.
Thank you.
President Trump is feeling confident about trade and about Canada joining the U.S. and Mexico in a new deal to replace NAFTA. So will we get a trade deal by the end of the week? Plus, some rare good news for frequent flyers, why a new study says love is in the air.